Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to talk about the phrase, the world outside your window, because you will rarely ever hear a major statement come out of Marvel, whether it be by a representative of Marvel themselves or someone who simply works for Marvel, from any place, whether it be an interview or a panel at a Comic-Con or a podcast. You will rarely hear any large statement come out of Marvel without hearing the phrase, the world outside your window. And quite specifically that they are the comic company who presents to you the world outside your window. And I want to look at that phrase and show you exactly why that is no longer the case, and why, because of it, their comics are just dying on the shelf. No one wants to read them. And speaking of comics that are dying on the shelf that no one wants to read, well, we just have to look no further than the new Marvel Rising #1 that came out this week. And this is actually what got me thinking about this topic to begin with. Because over at the Marvel Twitter page, which they use to promote their stuff, I would say more than even their own webpage, they had as their header for at least a month or more the Captain Marvel movie. But they have now changed it to this picture of the Marvel Rising #1. There has been a big push at Marvel to promote this Marvel Rising initiative, which I call it, because it includes comics and shorts on the internet and movies on the Disney Channel and dolls and toys and a whole bunch of other stuff. And they have been working on this for more than 2 years now and have been promoting it and trying to sell this group of characters. And I actually did review this comic as well. If you go to the community page of my YouTube channel, you will see my reviews for my comics, and that will be there. And I looked at it and I said to myself, is this the world outside my window? And I would say absolutely not. Now, to begin with, I want to take a couple of steps back and look at what a story is supposed to be. I'm going to look at the classical notion of what a story actually is and why we read and enjoy stories. Now, the classical notion of a story is it is an imitation. An imitation of what is the next question you'll ask? An imitation of man? Well, not exactly. It's supposed to be an imitation of nature, and man is a part of nature, and you include him in that. So a story is supposed to be an imitation of nature. And why do we present this imitation of nature? Because as human beings, we are, as the philosopher says, we are the most imitative animals that there are, and we learn through imitation. If you think about a baby or a toddler, you will find that they learn through imitation. They imitate the people around them, and that's how they learn. And not only that, but they are very overjoyed when they actually learn something through imitation. And this is partly what draws us to stories to begin with, because we are looking at this story, which is an imitation, supposedly, of nature, of the world around us, and we are using our imitative nature to actually interact with it, and so we are learning in that innocent, childlike way of imitation by looking at this imitation, and so it becomes fun to us. It is a kind of play learning, play fun. That's what the form of imitation of storytelling is actually supposed to be in the classical way of looking at a story. And you'll note that it is supposed to be an imitation of the world outside your window. It's supposed to be an imitation of nature and man as a part of nature. This is specifically what a story is supposed to do. So I would say that that little phrase that Marvel has had for a long time now, that is a beautiful phrase to use to try and sell stories, because that is exactly the heart of what a story originally, again according to the classical definition, is supposed to do. It's supposed to represent the world outside your window. So let's move on to the question of whether or not Marvel actually produces for you a representation of the world outside your window in their comics today. And I'm going to look at, to begin with, 3 different kinds of people that work for Marvel and that help bring about this story for you to consume as a product. Number 1 would be Kelly Sue DeConnick, because I've been looking at her a lot lately, because she's the creator of the modern Captain Marvel, the one that you see up on the screen if you go to see the Captain Marvel movie. And I have listened to a number of interviews with her, especially concerning Captain Marvel herself, the one that she did with the Women of Marvel podcast, which I did an entire video around. And she talks about in that interview wanting to find the engine that drives her characters. And it does sound like she is hearkening back to that original idea of how to create a story. She wants to find that thing which drives people, and she wants to imitate it on the page. But if you go further into the interview, what she talks about as being the ideas that she wants to focus on with these characters, number one that she presents is feminist intersectionality. Alright, so let's move on to another representative of Marvel. Let's move on to Brie Larson. Now, we all know from the interviews with Brie Larson that she wants to bring this character of Captain Marvel to life in order to promote her agenda. And what does her agenda look like? Well, she did an interview that was presented again on a Women of Marvel podcast just a few weeks ago, and she talks about, in part, that, again, feminist intersectionality is a core theme for this Captain Marvel movie. And the third person I want to look at is Sana Amanat. And Sana Amanat is the second in command at Marvel Comics. She is the VP of Content and Character Development. So she sets the tone for the content for Marvel Comics, and she sets the tone for the development of characters at Marvel Comics. So if there's anyone that would be at the forefront of helping promote the world outside your window, it would be Sana Amanat. And I want to focus on her as well, because she is the driving force behind Marvel Rising. Her character, the character that she helped co-create with G. Willow Wilson, which is Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, is the center of the entire Marvel Rising initiative. They have stated this quite clearly at Marvel. They build the entire storyline and all of the characters that come into the storyline around Kamala Khan. And Sana Amanat has said in interviews that the characters that she wants Marvel to put out there should be pushing positive ideas. And one of these so-called positive ideas that she wants to push through Marvel Rising, because she said this in a number of interviews, is body positivity. Now, body positivity can very easily be lumped in with feminist intersectionality as well. But let's look at this idea of body positivity in itself for a second. Why does Sana Amanat say that it is, and I quote, extremely important for the telling of this Marvel Rising story? Why? She says because there are many different body shapes out there. Now, that is entirely true, but she never actually takes the second step and explains to you why they have to present it in their comics. Well, the first step is there are many different shapes of bodies out there in the world, but the second step is that, and all of them are positive. That's why it's called body positivity. But that, of course, is a straight up lie. We all know this. You can go to your doctor and say, is there any body shape that I can be that would be not positive, that would actually be negative for me to have? And he would say, oh yeah, there definitely is. So here's the thing, especially with this, and the way that she always presents it in her interviews and in the stuff that she puts out there. She takes the first part and says, there's many different forms of body shapes out there, which is true. And then she leads you into the idea that all shapes are positive, but she never actually makes that statement, because we all know that that statement is false, and therefore she never actually says it specifically outright. She just implies it. Now, this is a tactic that they use over at Marvel a lot when they do interviews and podcasts, and it reminds me of the way that politicians are actually taught to speak. It's a form of sophistry. All right, sophistry is where you take a weak argument and you use it in a way to defeat a strong argument. Basically, it's a way to twist the words to make it look like you're winning the argument when you're not. And what politicians are actually taught to do when they give interviews is they listen to the question that someone asks them, usually a reporter. So they listen intently to that question, but when it comes time to answer the question, they don't actually answer the question. What they're taught to do is to answer the question that you wanted the reporter to ask, not answer the question that is actually asked. And in doing so, the point is that the politician hits enough of the points to make it sound like he's actually answering the question when he's not actually answering the question at all. All he's doing is promoting his point of view on the subject that has something to do with the question. And therefore, again, it looks like he's answering the question, but he's not. He's presenting you an idea. And this is exactly what they're doing over at Marvel. And this is actually what they're doing with their storytelling. storytelling. They are not presenting to you the world outside your window. They are presenting to you the world that they want to be outside their window. This far leftist utopian idea of a world that they want to be outside their window. And to illustrate this, let's look at this picture of Marvel Rising here. By the way, I'm only putting this picture up in my video today. I'm not doing like I usually do because I'm testing something out with YouTube. They seem to not like the fact that I put a lot of images in my videos, so I'm just testing that out. But let's look at this picture of the cover of the Marvel Rising #1 and talk about feminist intersectionality, which all of these three women who work for Marvel were talking about recently in one form or another as part of their storytelling at Marvel. So if you don't know what intersectionality is, it works like this. You have a basic assumption that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are the oppressed and there are the oppressors. And you can have different strains of oppression running through you. They can intersect within you, hence intersectionality, and then you can actually be more oppressed than the person next to you. So let's look at this cover again. You have Spider-Gwen and you have Captain Marvel. Both of them are women. All right, so they are +1 on the oppression scale because women are oppressed. So we move on to Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is a woman, and she's also a bit chunky, and she's specifically drawn that way in order to promote body positivity. So +1 being a woman and +2 because she has body positivity going on. So on the oppression scale, she is +2. Now we look at America Chavez. America Chavez is a woman. That's +1 on the oppression scale. She's also a person of color. That's +2 on the oppression scale. And she's a lesbian. That puts her at +3 on the oppression scale because these three different forms of oppression intersect within her. Now let's move on to Kamala Khan, who, as Marvel has stated, is the center of all of this Marvel Rising initiative. Well, Kamala Khan is a woman. That's +1. She is also a person of color. That's +2. She is also a Muslim. Therefore, that's +3. And, if I'm not mistaken, she's also an immigrant or the daughter of an immigrant family, which puts her at +4 on the intersectional oppression scale. So when you have this scale of intersectionality going on, basically what they are doing is creating a hierarchy. And the higher up you are on this hierarchy, like Kamala Khan, who's at the top, the more important the character actually is supposed to be. And further, what she says is more important than the people who are lower than her on the hierarchy. That's exactly why the story is centered around her, because she has all of this intersectionality going on. And so let's say you had an argument between Kamala Khan and Squirrel Girl. They would never actually argue in the comics. They never do anything of the kind. But let's say you had an argument between the two of them, and each of them had an exactly equal relevant point of their argument. Well, who would win the argument? Well, Kamala Khan would win the argument because her intersectionality puts her higher on the oppression scale than Squirrel Girl. So, as I said, it's just a hierarchy that they're trying to set up according to this scale of oppression, which is automatically the way that they see the world working. Now, does that sound like the world outside your window and how the world actually works? Well, I would definitely say no. And it also leads to a number of different kinds of tropes that they have in their comics, which emerge out of this feminist intersectionality. These kinds of tropes would be things like having somewhere between 30 to 50% of the people in the Marvel Universe be either gay or lesbian, when the world outside your actual window has studied that quite specifically and found out that it's actually somewhere between 1 to 3% of the population of the world. You also look at story traits where, let's say you have two lesbians that come together in a story. Well, they automatically fall deeply in love with each other. And if you want a storyline right now where you see that, you'll see that in The Exiles, you'll see that in Unstoppable Wasp, you'll see that in a number of stories going on right now. Another one of their tropes that they produce out of this would be if you have a bunch of women getting together who know practically nothing about each other. They all get together in a group suddenly, like is happening right now in Unstoppable Wasp and also in the Domino comic. Well, automatically they're all going to become best friends, because we all know that's how the world works, right? And I could go on and on with these new kinds of tropes that emerge from this feminist intersectionality hierarchy that they are placing within their comics. But the point with this that I want to make is the fact that they're not actually presenting the world outside your window, because your classical idea of your story is supposed to be an imitation of the world outside your window, or at the very least a representation of the world outside your window. But what they are doing in Marvel Comics right now is presenting to you a world that they want to see outside their window, this utopian world that they desperately want the world to actually look like. And to move on for a second, why exactly are they doing this? Well, because if you look at that classical idea of what a story is, it's dependent upon an idea that nature is a fixed thing, and man is a part of nature, and man, as being a part of that nature, has a nature. But these far leftists who believe ideas like feminist intersectionality, they still believe that old-fashioned idea that everyone else has given up on by now. Even serious academic leftist thinkers have given up on the idea that you are born a blank slate. But they still hold to this idea that you are a tabula rasa. You are born a blank slate, and you create exactly who you are from the very first steps upward. You have no nature whatsoever to speak of, and you simply create who you are. And I have covered 2 different interviews with 2 different writers for Marvel, one being Kelly Sue DeConnick, who created the current version of Captain Marvel, the other being G. Willow Wilson, who co-created Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, both of which you see on this cover right now for Marvel Rising. Both mirrored each other when they said that they believe that it is their job as a writer to change the world, and they can do so, but they can't do so directly. The way that they think that they can change the world is they will change the minds of the readers so that the readers will then take those ideas which are being presented to them and they will internalize them, and that will become who they are, and then those readers will go out and change the world with those ideas and with that identity. So this is quite specifically what they're trying to do. They're trying to take their ideas and, as the old saying goes, they will tell the lie often enough and large enough so that people begin to believe that this is what the actual world outside their window looks like. They will take those ideas into themselves, and because they're a blank slate, it will become their identity. They will use that identity to then change the world into this picture that they want the world actually to look like, and therefore the world will then become this utopian world that they believe that it should be. And really, there's a number of reasons why this doesn't work for selling comic books, but if I'm looking at specifically what I'm talking about today, the reason why it doesn't sell comic books is because that old idea, that classical idea of a story, it appeals to people because it is play learning, it is fun, and people know what the world outside their window actually looks like. And as such, they can tell whether or not this so-called representation of the world that is on the page in front of them is actually true or not. And so they can tell whether or not this innocent, fun, imitative learning can actually take place when they read a story. But when they read a story like is being presented by Marvel right now, who is not actually presenting the world outside your window, but is presenting a leftist utopian world that they want to be outside their window, well, that is not teaching you anything. That is indoctrinating you into ideas. That's why I say over and over again that what Marvel is presenting is propaganda, because that is exactly what they are presenting to you. They want to indoctrinate you into these ideas. And the difference between those two things, the difference between learning about the world and indoctrinating you into an idea, is the fact that when you look at learning about the world, if the world tells you it's a certain way, then you have to follow that. But if you're being presented ideas according to indoctrination, it will state that if you have one of these indoctrination ideas and it conflicts with the world around you, if it conflicts with reality, well, your indoctrination idea should win out. You don't actually pay attention to what reality is telling you. You stick to that indoctrination idea. And that, quite obviously, is the furthest thing that you can get from a representation of the world outside your window. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.